She swore she would never love the man who bought her fate. The millionaire saw marriage as possession, not a promise. But when a mysterious billionaire crosses her path, the impossible happens. Between danger and desire, love becomes her only escape. Chapter 1. Louisa's Choice. The afternoon sun bathed the cobblestone streets of Newport Cove as Louisa Hayes ran desperately towards the pharmacy. Tourists strolling peacefully through the historic alleys barely noticed the young brown-haired woman clutching a crumpled medical prescription. Sweat trickled down her face, marked by fatigue, as she tried not to stumble on the uneven stones. "Mr. Miller, I need my father's medicine," she exclaimed, arriving breathless at the counter of the small colonial pharmacy. The pharmacist, an elderly man with glasses perched on the tip of his nose, looked up from the newspaper he was reading. His compassionate gaze turned to discomfort as he recognized the young woman. "Louisa, my dear, we talked about this yesterday. Your bill is very high. I can't keep supplying medicine without payment." The young woman placed her hands on the counter, trying to control the tremor she felt. "Please, Mr. Miller, it's his heart. You know that ever since Mom left us, I only have him. I promise I'll get the money." The pharmacist sighed, a mix of pity and helplessness. He had known Edmund Hayes since childhood. He knew that the retired history professor was an honorable man who had raised his daughter alone after his wife's passing. Now debilitated by heart problems, he depended on expensive medications that Louisa's modest salary as an art restorer at the small local atelier couldn't cover. "This time, I'll release it. But Louisa, you need to find a solution. These medicines are expensive and the treatment is long." She nodded, her eyes welling up with restrained tears. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. God bless you." As she walked back home, a simple house near the historic center, Louisa thought of all the exhausted possibilities. The denied loans, the overtime that wasn't enough, the restoration atelier that barely paid the basic bills. When she entered the house and saw her father sleeping in the living room armchair, his face pale and his breathing labored, she felt the weight of that reality crush her chest. "Daughter, is that you?" Edmund's weak voice cut through the silence. "Yes, Dad, I brought your medicine." Louisa forced a smile as she helped her father sit up better. "Did you manage to pay?" he asked, worried. "Of course, everything's fine," she lied, avoiding the attentive eyes of the retired professor. "Now take your medicine, and then we'll have dinner. I made that soup you like." That night, after making sure her father was asleep, Louisa sat on the small back porch. This was her creative space, with unfinished canvases and pots of paint. Painting had always been her refuge, a way to express what words couldn't. Since she was little, she showed talent, but she never had the opportunity to study formally. She learned restoration from an artist who had passed through Newport Cove years ago and was enchanted by her natural skill. She picked up a brush and began to glide it over a blank canvas. Intense forms in red and blue came to life as tears finally fell freely down her face. The situation had become unsustainable. Debts were growing and her father's health was deteriorating. She needed a solution, and fast. The next morning, she headed to the atelier earlier than usual. The small space on the ground floor of a historic mansion was filled with artworks for restoration, mainly pieces from local churches and portraits from traditional families. It was while working on one of these canvases that Louisa met Theodore Maxwell. The middle-aged man, elegantly dressed in a light suit, suitable for the coastal climate, watched intently as she brought life back to a family portrait. "Impressive," he commented, startling Louisa, who hadn't noticed his presence. "Your hands seem to have magic." "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. I'm almost finished with your painting." Theodore Maxwell was not just any client. Owner of a luxury hotel chain, he had recently bought a historic mansion in Newport Cove to turn it into his summer residence. Known for his refined taste and political influence, he was feared and respected in the region. "I didn't come for the painting." "I came for you," he declared with a disturbing certainty. "I heard your father is sick, and that you are having difficulties." Louisa felt her blood run cold. How did he know? Newport Cove was small, of course, but still, the feeling of invasion was uncomfortable. "These are private matters, Mr. Maxwell. I appreciate your concern, but we are managing." A cold smile appeared on the businessman's lips. "Don't be proud, Louisa. I know exactly what situation you're in. The debts at the pharmacy, the loan denied at the bank, the overdue rent. And most importantly, I know your father needs surgery that the public health system will only schedule months from now. She dropped the brush, feeling her legs weaken. How did he have access to such personal information? What do you want? She asked, her voice almost failing. To offer a solution. Theodore approached, his expensive perfume invading the space. I like you, Louisa. Your beauty, your talent, your purity. You would be the perfect adornment for my social life. And besides, he paused, his eyes scanning the young woman's body without disguise, I'm sure we will be compatible in all aspects. Louisa felt nauseous. The proposal was absurd, medieval even. But when she thought of her father, the pharmacy, the debts, the slow deterioration she observed day after day, I need time to think. Does your father have time? The cruel question hit her like a blow. I have contacts, Louisa. I can get the surgery for tomorrow itself. Private doctors, recovery in a specialized clinic. Or you can continue watching him with her while waiting in the public health system queue. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back. She wouldn't give him the pleasure of seeing her weak. How much time do I have to decide? Until tomorrow. Theodore walked to the door, stopping before leaving. Think carefully, Louisa. It's not every day someone in your situation receives an offer like this. When he left, Louisa collapsed into the chair. Her hands trembled so much she couldn't hold the brush. The proposal echoed in her mind like a nightmare. Marrying Theodore Maxwell meant giving up her freedom, her dreams. It meant surrendering to a man who saw her as property to be acquired. But what was the alternative? To see her father suffer? To see him leave without being able to do anything? That night, sitting by her father's bed as he breathed with difficulty after a new episode of pain, Louisa made her decision. She cried silently, tears falling onto the wrinkled hand she held with affection. The choice was made. For love of her father, she would give up her own life. Chapter 2. The Gilded Cage. The white dress weighed like lead on Louisa's shoulders as she walked down the aisle of Newport Cove's main church. The few guests present observed with curiosity and astonishment the improbable union between the young restorer and the powerful businessman. In her eyes no sparkle. In her trembling hands, holding a small bouquet of white flowers, the evidence of a sacrifice disguised as a celebration. In the first row, Edmund Hayes watched his daughter with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. After successful heart surgery at one of the best hospitals in New York City, his recovery was progressing rapidly, but the price of that medical miracle was too high and he knew it. When Louisa told him about the agreement with Theodore, he tried to refuse. I'd rather leave this world than see you sell yourself for my sake, he said with tears in his eyes. But the decision was already made. I do, Louisa said, her voice firm when the priest asked the ritual question. The word echoed through the church like a definitive sentence. Theodore smiled, satisfied. At 45, divorced and childless, he finally got what he so desired. The beautiful young woman who had fascinated him from the first moment he saw her restoring a canvas in the small atelier. It wasn't love. He didn't know that feeling. It was possession, obsession, a desire to control that purity which now legally belonged to him. The party that followed, held in Theodore's newly renovated colonial mansion, contrasted with the simplicity of the ceremony. Local politicians, influential businessmen, and important society figures toasted the new couple. Louisa smiled mechanically, like a doll programmed to please. Smile for real, Theodore whispered through clenched teeth, keeping his own social smile intact. You are my wife now. Behave as such. At midnight, when the last guests had left, Louisa found herself alone with her husband for the first time. The mansion's master bedroom, decorated with restored antique furniture and valuable works of art, felt cold despite the luxury. You made the right choice, Theodore said, approaching her as he unbuttoned his shirt. Your father is safe, your debts are paid, and you are now Mrs. Maxwell. Many women would give anything to be in your place. Louisa swallowed hard, feeling her heart quicken with fear. Yes, I made my choice, and I will honor our agreement. The wedding night was, as she feared, mechanical, cold, without any trace of affection or consideration. When Theodore finally fell asleep, Louisa cried silently, curled up in the opposite corner of the king-size bed. She felt dirty, used, but at the same time she thought of her father. In the morning he would be taken to a rehabilitation clinic in New York City, where he would receive the best care. For him, she would endure anything. The following weeks brought the true dimension of her new reality. The colonial mansion in Newport Cove, despite all its luxury and beauty, became her prison. Theodore controlled every aspect of her life. Her clothes, previously selected by him, her meals determined by a hired nutritionist to keep her in shape, her schedule rigidly established. A wife must be impeccable, he declared, introducing her to the housekeeper who would supervise her daily activities. Caroline will ensure you learn to carry yourself as a true Mrs. Maxwell. Caroline Fisher, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression, became her constant shadow. Mr. Maxwell likes his coffee served exactly at 7, she would explain. He prefers his clothes pressed with a perfect crease. Dinner must be served when he arrives, regardless of the time. Louisa, who once lived for colors, brushes, and creative freedom, now saw her days pass in a suffocating routine of empty social obligations and senseless rules. "I want to continue restoring artworks," she asked one morning, while Theodore read the newspaper. "I could set up a small atelier at home." He slowly lowered the newspaper, his cold eyes studying her as one evaluates an object. "My wife does not work. It would be humiliating for me. If you want to paint, paint. As a hobby, not a profession." That's how Louisa's secret garden was born. In the back of the colonial mansion, between ivy-covered walls and ancient trees, she found a small forgotten space, an old tool shed that, with Theodore's reluctant permission, she transformed into her refuge. "If it keeps you busy and in a good mood, do as you wish," he conceded without much interest. "Just make sure you are presentable when we have visitors." In the small improvised atelier, away from the watchful eyes of her husband and the housekeeper, Louisa was herself again. The blank canvases received not only colors, but all her repressed emotions: the intense red of anger, the deep blue of sadness, the vibrant yellow of hope that refused to die. Her paintings, once delicate and contemplative, became intense, almost violent in their expressiveness. "What is this?" Theodore asked once, entering the atelier unannounced and coming across a particularly disturbing canvas, a female figure imprisoned in a structure that resembled a gilded cage. "It's just an experimentation," she replied, quickly covering the work with a cloth. "I'm trying new techniques." He arched an eyebrow, suspicious. "I hope these experimentations do not reflect any kind of ingratitude on your part. I gave you everything a woman could desire." "Of course not. I am grateful." The word came out with difficulty. Although she maintained a facade of cordiality, the relationship between the two deteriorated daily. Theodore became increasingly controlling, demanding that Louisa account for every minute out of his sight. Phone calls to her father, now settled in a small apartment in New York City after his recovery, were monitored. Rare visits to the city, always accompanied by Caroline, were limited to social engagements or medical appointments. It was during one of these routine appointments that Louisa met Dr. Beatrice Smith, a gynecologist with kind eyes who immediately noticed the signs of distress in the young woman. "Is everything all right with you, Louisa?" she asked after dismissing Caroline from the examination room. The genuine care in the doctor's voice was like a breach in the dam holding back Louisa's emotions. Tears came unbidden. "No, it's not," she finally admitted, her voice almost inaudible. Beatrice held her hands firmly. "You're not alone. There are resources, support." Louisa shook her head, hastily wiping away her tears. "You don't understand. My father, he depends on this." Theodore made it clear that if I left him, he would cut off all financial support. My father would go back to the public health system queue, lose his apartment, everything. The doctor wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to her. "This is my personal number, if you need to talk anytime. And this other one is for a psychologist friend. Tell her I called because of insomnia." That small gesture of solidarity was like a match lit in the darkness. For the first time in months, Louisa felt she wasn't completely alone. Meanwhile, the Maxwell couple's social life intensified. Theodore, proud to display his beautiful wife as a trophy, hosted frequent dinners at his colonial mansion, now one of the gathering points for the state's economic and political elite. It was during one of these events that Louisa first noticed those eyes. Raphael King, 38, was a well-known figure in American business circles. Founder of one of the country's largest technology companies, he had a reputation for being reserved and extremely selective about his public appearances. Tall, with striking features and a penetrating gaze, he stood out not only for his billionaire fortune, but for the aura of mystery that surrounded him. Raphael. "What a surprise to have you here," Theodore exclaimed, visibly pleased with the businessman's presence. "Allow me to introduce my wife, Louisa." When their eyes met, Louisa felt something inexplicable, as if those dark eyes saw beyond the facade of a perfect wife she was forced to maintain. For a brief moment she felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he could read every thought, every contained tear, every silenced scream. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Maxwell," Raphael said, his deep voice contrasting with the softness of his gesture as he kissed her hand. "Your husband talks a lot about you." "The pleasure is mine," she replied automatically, surprised by the slight tremor in her own voice. During dinner, she felt Raphael's gaze on her several times, observant, analytical, almost uncomfortable in its intensity. It wasn't the look of male admiration she had grown accustomed to at parties. It was something deeper, as if he was trying to decipher an enigma. Later, while serving liqueurs in the study to Theodore and his most important guests, she overheard a fragment of conversation that intrigued her. "We need King Tech's investment for the resort project," Theodore was telling one of his partners, "and Raphael is known for his almost pathological integrity. If he suspected any irregularity—" At that moment, Raphael entered the study, interrupting the conversation. His eyes met Louisa's for an instant, and she could swear she saw a slight smile form at the corner of his lips, not of mockery or flirtation, but of silent understanding. When all the guests finally left, Theodore, overly satisfied with the success of the night, pulled Louisa by the arm to the bedroom. "You behaved well tonight," he commented as he loosened his tie. Raphael King was clearly impressed. "And we need him. He seems different from your other partners," Louisa ventured. Theodore laughed without humor. "Raphael is an idealist, rich enough to afford principles, but everyone has their price, don't they?" He approached her, touching her face with false delicacy. "Even you, my dear, had yours." That night, while Theodore slept soundly after drinking too much, Louisa remained awake, mentally replaying every detail of her encounter with Raphael. There was something about him that stirred not only curiosity, but a forgotten feeling: hope. What she didn't know was that, on the other side of the city, in his suite at Newport Cove's most exclusive hotel, Raphael King also couldn't sleep. On his laptop screen, an open file displayed information about Theodore Maxwell, his companies, his businesses, his political connections. And in a corner of the screen, a photo of Louisa taken years ago, when she was still just the talented restorer, daughter of the respected Professor Edmund Hayes. "So it's you," Raphael murmured to the image. "I finally found her." Chapter 3. Roots of the Past. Raphael King observed the sea of Newport Cove from his suite's balcony. The sun rose lazily over the calm bay waters, gradually illuminating the islands that dotted the horizon. Unlike most billionaires of his generation, Raphael did not flaunt his fortune. The watch on his wrist was the same one he wore when he was just a computer science student in New York City. And his clothes, though of quality, were discreet and functional. On his desk, scattered across the wooden surface, were old documents and photographs. One in particular caught his eye: a middle-aged man, with a grey beard and a gentle expression, next to a little girl of approximately 10, holding a newly painted picture. "Edmund Hayes and his daughter Louisa," Raphael murmured, touching the photograph with his fingertips. "Who would have thought we'd meet like this?" 15 years ago, Raphael was just a promising young man who had just created innovative software. He was on the verge of bankruptcy, having invested everything he had in developing his product, when a university history professor, visiting the tech incubator for an academic project, became interested in his work. "Your program could revolutionize access to historical archives," Edmund had said at the time. "But you need initial capital." It was this professor who introduced him to a small group of investors, and more importantly, who offered his own home as collateral for a crucial loan. "I believe in you, young man," were his words. "Sometimes all a dream needs is someone who believes." That gesture of trust changed Raphael's destiny. The loan allowed him to finalize the software, which quickly attracted the attention of major companies. In a few years, the small startup transformed into King Tech, one of the largest technology companies in North America. Raphael never forgot the man who had bet on him when no one else did. He tried to return the favor many times, but Edmund always refused any financial help. "Use that money to help other young people like you," the professor would say. "That will make me much happier than any payment." Respecting his wish, Raphael created a foundation that funded technological projects for young people from low-income backgrounds. He kept in touch with Edmund for a few years until, after a long international trip to expand his businesses, he lost contact. His attempts to locate the professor were frustrated by changes of address and disconnected phones. And now, years later, fate brought them together again in the most unexpected way possible. While investigating potential partners for a new eco-resort project, Theodore Maxwell's name came up as an owner of strategic land on the New York State coast. Preliminary research indicated an ambitious businessman with dubious political connections. But it was only when Raphael decided to personally attend the dinner in Newport Cove that the true surprise was revealed. Theodore's young wife was none other than Louisa, Edmund's daughter. Those eyes, restless, sad, imprisoned, belonged to the daughter of the man who had changed his life. Why did she marry someone like Maxwell, he wondered, as he opened his laptop. The answer soon appeared. His investigative team had already compiled detailed information: Edmund's heart disease, the financial difficulties, Theodore's proposal, the hurried marriage. An agreement, not a marriage, Raphael concluded, feeling a mixture of anger and determination grow within him. It wasn't just a debt of gratitude that motivated him now. It was something deeper, more personal. 5 years earlier, his younger sister, Clara, had been found lifeless in her apartment in New York City. Officially a sad domestic accident, but Raphael knew the truth. Clara had tried to escape an abusive relationship with a powerful executive who isolated her from everyone, who slowly broke her until she saw no other way out. The helplessness he felt, the guilt for not noticing the signs, for not acting in time, still haunted him. And now, seeing that same empty look in Louisa's eyes, something inside him ignited. He would not let history repeat itself. Not this time. "Mr. King, your car is ready," his assistant informed him by phone. "Thank you, Maurice. I'll be down in 5 minutes." Raphael carefully placed the documents and the photograph in a folder. He had a meeting with Theodore Maxwell at the headquarters of his companies in Newport Cove. The pretext was to discuss the possible investment in the resort, but his true objectives went far beyond business. Maxwell Enterprises' headquarters occupied a restored colonial mansion in the most exclusive part of the historic center. The contrast between the preserved colonial architecture and the ultra-modern interior reflected the duality of its owner, traditional in appearance, relentlessly contemporary in his methods. "Raphael, punctual as always," Theodore greeted, rising from his imposing mahogany desk. "Please make yourself comfortable." The meeting proceeded with the professional coolness typical of major negotiations. Theodore presented projects, spreadsheets, profit projections. Raphael, maintaining a facade of moderate interest, asked pertinent questions, analyzed documents, suggested changes. "One last thing before we conclude," Raphael said, checking his watch. "I'd like to see the properties personally before making any decision. I believe seeing the land with my own eyes will help me better visualize the potential." Theodore smiled, satisfied. "Of course, we can arrange that for tomorrow. I have other commitments today, but my wife could show you the local art gallery in the meantime. She has a peculiar knowledge of restoration. It was her profession before we married." The condescending tone did not go unnoticed by Raphael. "It would be a pleasure. I am an admirer of art, especially restoration." Minutes later, Louisa was called to the office. She wore an elegant navy blue dress that contrasted with her paleness. Her eyes, momentarily surprised to see Raphael, soon returned to their usual controlled expression. "Louisa, darling, Mr. King would like to see the art gallery. Since you know the collection well, I thought you could accompany him." "Of course, it would be a pleasure," she replied, with the soft voice she had learned to use in public. Caroline, the housekeeper, made a move to accompany them, but Theodore stopped her with a gesture. "It won't be necessary, Caroline. The gallery is just a few meters from here in broad daylight, and I'm sure Mr. King will take good care of my wife." The look he cast at Raphael contained not trust but warning, a predator recognizing another in his territory. As they walked through the cobblestone streets of Newport Cove, Raphael and Louisa maintained a polite conversation about local art and history. She, clearly tense, measured every word. He, patient, waited for the right moment. It was only inside the small gallery among works by contemporary artists that they found a moment of privacy. "Your restoration work must be exceptional," Raphael commented, observing an old, recovered canvas. "It was," she corrected, with a trace of bitterness in her voice. "I don't work with that anymore." "By choice?" The look she gave him was a more eloquent answer than any words. "You didn't come here to talk about art, did you?" Raphael smiled, slightly, approaching a painting so they could talk without being overheard by the few visitors in the gallery. "Your father was a history professor at NYU, wasn't he?" The mention of her father made Louisa pale. "How do you know that?" "Edmund Hayes, an extraordinary man, generous, honorable, visionary." "You knew my father?" The genuine surprise in her voice was evident. "He changed my life," Raphael replied sincerely. "Years ago, when I was still struggling to establish my company, your father believed in me when no one else did. He risked everything he had to help me." Involuntary tears welled up in Louisa's eyes. "That sounds exactly like something my father would do." Raphael nodded, observing her every reaction. "When I learned he was sick and that you had married Theodore Maxwell under peculiar circumstances, I needed to understand what happened." Louisa's brief moment of vulnerability disappeared, replaced by caution. "I don't know what you heard, but my marriage is a private matter." "Of course, and I respect that." Raphael stepped back slightly, giving her space. "I just wonder if Edmund knows that the man he helped years ago is now in a position to return the favor." Those words hung between them like an unspoken promise. Louisa, confused and suspicious, studied Raphael's face, searching for any sign of deception. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I believe in returning kindness with kindness. In honoring debts not just financial but moral." Raphael paused significantly. "And because I recognize when someone is in a complicated situation." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other visitors. The moment of intimacy broke, but something had changed. Her seed of possibility had been planted. Back at the Maxwell mansion, Louisa felt agitated, confused. Raphael's revelation had opened a door to long-repressed memories and feelings. She remembered her father speaking fondly of a promising young entrepreneur years ago. Could it really be Raphael King? That afternoon, isolated in her garden atelier, Louisa tried to process everything while painting with feverish intensity. Colors blended on the canvas, creating abstract forms that reflected her inner turmoil. "It's an interesting work," a voice said behind her. Louisa turned, startled, dropping a brush. Theodore rarely came to her atelier. "What did you think of Mr. King?" he asked, walking through the small space, examining the canvases with unusual interest. "He seems to be an intelligent and cultured man," she replied cautiously. "He showed genuine interest in the works at the gallery." Theodore picked up one of her brushes, twirling it between his fingers. "Did he ask any personal questions?" Louisa's heart quickened. "No, why would he?" A cold smile appeared on Theodore's lips. "No reason, just curious." He returned the brush to the table and approached, touching her face with false tenderness. "King is a dangerous man, Louisa, not because he's violent or aggressive, but because of his inflexible integrity. He destroys reputations, ruins businesses, all in the name of his principles." "I don't understand why you're telling me this." "Just a friendly warning, dear." The hand on her face slid down to her neck, a caress that contained a veiled threat. "Keep your distance and remember our agreement. Your father depends on it." When Theodore left, Louisa sat down, trembling. The mention of her father was a constant reminder of the invisible chains that bound her to that marriage. But Raphael's words also echoed in her mind. That night, while her husband attended a meeting with local politicians, Louisa went to the library phone. With trembling hands, she dialed the number she had memorized from Raphael's cell phone screen when he checked the time at the gallery. After 2 rings, the deep voice answered, "King." It's Louisa." Her voice was almost a whisper. A brief silence. "I'm listening. I need to know what you really want from me. Why did you appear now? What do you expect to gain from this?" The answer came without hesitation. "I want nothing from you, Louisa. I want something for you, freedom." The word hit her like a wave, bringing tears to her eyes. "You don't understand. It's not that simple." "I know. I know about the agreement, about the veiled threats, about how your father would be harmed if you tried to leave." Raphael's voice softened. "I also know what it's like to watch someone we love be destroyed in a toxic relationship and do nothing about." Something in the way he said it made Louisa realize there was a personal story behind those words. "Theodore is powerful. He has connections everywhere," she warned him. "So do I," he replied simply. "And unlike him, I have nothing to hide." The sound of approaching footsteps alarmed Louisa. "I have to hang up. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. at the historic bookstore near the pier," Raphael said quickly. "I have something to show you." Louisa hung up just as Caroline entered the library. "Do you need anything, ma'am?" the housekeeper asked with suspicion in her eyes. "Just checking if my father received the books I sent," Louisa lied with a calm she didn't feel. "I'm done." That night, as she watched her husband sleep beside her, Louisa thought about the meeting scheduled for the next day. Part of her feared it was a trap. Perhaps Raphael was working with Theodore, testing her loyalty. Another part, however, the part that still allowed herself to dream, saw in that man a possibility of rescue. What she didn't know was that at that exact moment, Raphael King was on a secure video call with his investigation team in New York City. "I want everything on Theodore Maxwell," he instructed. "Suspicious business, tax evasion, bribes, anything. And find Edmund Hayes. I want to ensure he's protected no matter what happens." On his screen, a photo of Louisa, not Theodore Maxwell's submissive wife, but the young artist from years ago, smiling beside a restored artwork. In her eyes, a vivacity that was now dormant, but which Raphael was determined to awaken again. Chapter 4. Hidden Pages. The Old Pages bookstore was one of Newport Cove's preserved treasures. Housed in a colonial mansion with thick walls and wide windows, it maintained the atmosphere of another era. Dark wooden shelves housed everything from literary classics to rare works on local history. The scent of old paper mingled with the smell of fresh coffee served in a small area at the back. Louisa entered the establishment with her heart racing. She had told Caroline that she needed to buy painting supplies, and surprisingly, the housekeeper didn't insist on accompanying her. Perhaps because the art supply store was only 2 blocks from the mansion, right in the historic center, where everyone knew her as Mrs. Maxwell. What Caroline didn't know was that Louisa had no intention of buying paints or brushes. As soon as she was out of sight of the mansion, she took a different path, heading to the bookstore near the pier. Raphael was already there when she arrived. Sitting in a worn leather armchair, he was leafing through a book of old photographs of Newport Cove. He wore jeans and a light linen shirt, a simplicity that contrasted with Theodore's ostentatious opulence. "I thought you wouldn't come," he commented, standing up when he saw her. Louisa looked nervously around. "I don't have much time. Caroline expects me back soon." Raphael nodded, understanding. "Let's go to the back. I reserved the cafe area. We'll have privacy." The bookstore's cafe area was a small inner courtyard, with iron tables spread under the shelter of an old grapevine. Only an elderly lady was reading in a distant corner, too absorbed in her novel to pay attention to them. "Why did you call me here?" Louisa asked as soon as they sat down. Anxiety made her voice sharper than usual. Raphael placed a leather folder on the table. "Before I show you what I brought, I need you to understand something." He paused, carefully choosing his words. "What I'm about to tell you is personal, something I share with very few people." Intrigued, Louisa relaxed slightly. There was genuine seriousness and vulnerability in his eyes. "I had a sister," Raphael began, his voice slightly altered by contained emotion. Clara was 5 years younger than me, brilliant, talented, full of life. When I started my company, she was in art school. We only had each other after our parents passed away. Raphael opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. A beautiful young woman with dark hair and a radiant smile, in front of an art exhibition. Clara met Victor during a charity event. He was 20 years older, owner of a renowned gallery in New York City, well-connected, charismatic. The romance was quick and intense. In 6 months, they were living together. Louisa observed the photograph, feeling an inexplicable identification with the smiling young woman. At first, it seemed perfect. Victor showered her with gifts, introduced her to important art circles, financed her projects. Then gradually everything changed. Raphael took a deep breath. First it was small things, criticisms about her clothes, comments about her weight, questions about her friendships. Then isolation. She stopped answering my calls, cancelled last-minute meetings, rarely visited. When we saw each other, she was always accompanied by him. Louisa felt a knot in her throat. The story sounded painfully familiar. When I finally realized what was happening, it was too late. Raphael's voice faltered slightly. Clara was completely under his control. I tried to intervene, offered help, even threatened Victor legally. But he was smart, manipulative. He convinced Clara that I was jealous of her success, that I wanted to sabotage her. What happened to her? Louisa asked almost in a whisper. Raphael's eyes darkened with pain. She tried to leave. After years of psychological abuse, she finally gathered the courage to leave him. That night, Clara... He paused, unable to continue for a moment. There was an accident. She fell down the stairs of the apartment. Doctors said it was instantaneous. Louisa covered her mouth with her hands. My God. Officially, it was a domestic accident. I couldn't prove Victor was involved, although I tried every way I could. He had an alibi, he had witnesses, he had the best lawyers. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. I lost my sister twice, first to his control, then forever. A heavy silence settled between them. Louisa felt tears burn in her eyes, not only for Clara but for herself, for the terrifying recognition of her own possible future in Raphael's words. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Because when I saw you at that dinner, I recognized in your eyes the same look I saw in Clara's for years." Raphael leaned across the table, his voice now a mixture of determination and plea. "And because I swore I would never again stand by and watch someone be destroyed like that, especially the daughter of the man who saved my life." Raphael pulled more documents from the folder. The first was an old diary with a worn leather cover. "I found this among your father's belongings that he left in the university apartment before he got sick. The janitor kept some boxes, and when he learned I was looking for Edmund, he gave them to me." Louisa took the diary with trembling hands, immediately recognizing her father's handwriting. Leafing through the yellowed pages, she found the entry Raphael had marked. March 15th, 2010. "Today I did something few would understand. I mortgaged our house to help a young man I barely know. Louisa would be furious if she knew, but there's something about this young man, Raphael, that reminds me of myself in my youth. The same determination, the same integrity. His project could transform access to historical education in the country. Some would call it madness, but I prefer to call it faith. Faith in human potential, in the future, in possibilities that transcend fear and prudence. If it goes wrong, I'll lose the house I built with Helen. If it goes right, I'll have helped build something much greater than concrete walls." Tears now flowed freely down Louisa's face. "He never told me about this. Never mentioned helping you. Your father was like that. Generous without fanfare, courageous without ostentation." Raphael smiled gently. "The loan he secured changed everything for me. In 2 years I paid off the debt in full. But when I tried to repay him by offering a stake in the company, he refused. He said helping others wasn't an investment, it was humanity." Louisa closed the diary, feeling simultaneously proud and small. While she sold herself to save her father, he had given everything he had to help a stranger, asking nothing in return. "There's more," Raphael said, sliding another document across the table. "It was a detailed medical report. I hired the best specialists to analyze your father's condition. The surgery he received was just the beginning. There are advanced treatments in Germany that could not only stabilize him, but potentially reverse much of the heart damage." Louisa examined the report, surprised by the level of detail. How did you get this? I have resources and contacts. But more importantly, I have motivation. Raphael hesitated before continuing. Louisa, your husband is not who you think he is. Theodore Maxwell's fortune doesn't just come from hotels and resorts. He pulled a final set of documents from the folder, newspaper clippings, financial reports, photographs of Theodore with politicians known for involvement in corruption schemes. Maxwell is involved in money laundering, land grabbing, bribery of public officials. The resort he wants me to finance is just a front to legitimize money from questionable sources. Raphael pointed to some numbers in the documents. My investigative team found solid evidence. That's why he needs my investment so badly. Not for the money itself, but for the legitimacy my name would bring to the project. Louisa felt dizzy with so many revelations. Part of her wanted to deny everything, to protect herself from the truth and its implications. Another part, however, knew Raphael was right. The closed-door meetings, the disreputable politicians who frequented their home, the phone calls Theodore answered only in his locked office. Even if all this is true, what can I do? She asked, her voice defeated. He made it clear that if I tried to leave, my father would lose everything. The house, the treatment, the medical care. That's where I come in. Raphael closed the folder with determination. I can guarantee your father's safety, the best medical treatment available, legal protection against any retaliation from Theodore. I can offer you and Edmund a new chance, Louisa. No agreements, no exchanges, no demands. Why? Why would you risk yourself like this for us? Because I owe it to your father. Because I couldn't save Clara, and because... He paused as if weighing the next words. Because ever since I saw you at that dinner, I can't ignore what's happening. I would be complicit if I remained silent. Louisa stared into Raphael's dark eyes, searching for any sign of falsehood or manipulation. She found only sincere determination and something more, a compassion she had forgotten existed. I'm not asking you to trust me completely now, he continued, seeing her hesitation. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility of a different life, a life that is truly yours. Louisa didn't have time to answer. Her cell phone vibrated. A message from Caroline asking where she was, saying Theodore had arrived home early and was looking for her. The immediate panic she felt was revealing. It wasn't the normal apprehension of a late spouse, but the terror of someone who fears punishment. I have to go, she said, getting up hastily. Theodore is back. He's looking for me. Raphael also stood up. Take this with you. He handed her a small USB drive. All the evidence I showed you, plus some information on how I can help. There's also a secure number to contact me. Hide it well. Louisa hesitated before taking the device. What if he finds out? He won't, Raphael assured her. But if you have any suspicion, any sign of danger, use the code saved on the USB drive. It's a simple word, Aurora. Send it to the indicated number and I'll have a team at your house in minutes. She nodded, putting the USB drive in her purse with trembling hands. Louisa, Raphael called as she turned to leave. You deserve to be free. Never forget that. Those words accompanied her all the way back. Free. A condition that seemed so distant, so abstract that she could almost not conceive it. What would it be like to wake up without fear? To speak without calculating every word? To paint without hiding? Upon arriving at the art supply store, she quickly bought some paints to justify her outing. On the way to the mansion, she mentally rehearsed plausible excuses for her delay. Theodore was waiting for her in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his impassive face that she had learned to fear more than any expression of anger. Where have you been? The question, seemingly casual, contained implicit threat. Buying painting supplies, Louisa replied, showing the bag as proof. I needed some specific colors that took me a while to find. He examined the bag, then turned his eyes to her face as if looking for signs of a lie. I thought Caroline was with you. I said it wasn't necessary. The store is nearby. Theodore took a sip of his drink. It's curious. I called the store half an hour ago when you weren't back. They said they hadn't seen you today. Louisa's heart seemed to stop. A basic mistake. She hadn't anticipated he would check her story. I went to the bookstore first, she quickly improvised. I wanted a book on painting techniques I saw in the window the other day. Bookstore. Theodore placed the glass on the table with studied care. Which bookstore? Old pages near the pier. A cold smile appeared on his lips. Interesting choice. So far from home when there's a bookstore just a block away. They have a better art section. Theodore stood up, approaching slowly. You know what else is interesting? Raphael King was seen at Old Pages today. He paused, observing her reaction. Quite a coincidence, don't you think? Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but years of practice in hiding emotions allowed her to maintain her composure. I didn't see Mr. King, but it's a small town, coincidences happen. For a long moment, Theodore just studied her, like a scientist analyzing a specimen. Of course, coincidences. He finally moved away, pouring himself more whiskey. You know what else is curious? King cancelled our meeting tomorrow. Apparently he's no longer interested in the resort project. The relief she felt was quickly replaced by new tension. If Raphael had cancelled the investment, it meant he was ready to act against Theodore. Things were moving quickly. Perhaps he found a better investment, she suggested, trying to sound casual. Perhaps. Theodore smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Or perhaps he found something or someone more interesting in Newport Cove. The rest of the afternoon passed in almost unbearable tension. Louisa felt Theodore's eyes following her constantly, searching for any slip, any confirmation of his suspicions. Caroline also seemed more vigilant, appearing coincidentally wherever Louisa was. That night, as she prepared for bed, Louisa found something in her lingerie drawer, a small wireless microphone skillfully hidden among the silk pieces. Her heart raced. She was being monitored. For how long? What had Theodore heard? Carefully, so as not to reveal that she had discovered the device, she continued her routine. The USB drive Raphael had given her burned in her conscience. She needed to hide it, but where? Every inch of the house was Theodore's territory. It was then that she had an idea. Her garden. The only place she still kept as her own. After dinner, when Theodore locked himself in his study for an important call, Louisa asked permission to go to the atelier. I want to finish a canvas before bed. He nodded absently, more concerned with his call than with his wife's activities at that moment. In the small atelier, Louisa worked feverishly. First, she made sure to check the entire space, finding another microphone hidden behind a shelf. With the device still functioning, she began to paint normally, occasionally talking to herself about colors and techniques. While the paint was still wet, she carefully inserted the USB drive into the thick mass of blue oil paint on the palette. Then she mixed more color over it, creating a small mound that looked like just excess paint. If anyone looked, they would only see a used palette with drying paint remnants. Back in the bedroom, she lay down beside Theodore, more vigilant than ever. Her heart raced every time he moved, fearing that at any moment he would reveal knowledge of her meeting with Raphael. About the USB drive, about everything. In the darkness of the room, as she pretended to sleep, Louisa thought about her father's diary, about the words she had read in the bookstore. She thought about Clara, Raphael's sister, whose fate could easily be her own, and for the first time in a long time she thought about freedom, not as a distant dream, but as a tangible possibility. Aurora, she murmured silently to herself, memorizing the word that could mean her salvation. Aurora, the sunrise after the darkest night, a promise of light when all seemed lost. Chapter 5. Seeds of Resistance. The Maxwell Mansion Library was an imposing space. Walls lined with mahogany shelves housed hundreds of leather-bound volumes, many of which Theodore had never read, acquired for their decorative value or the status they conferred. Sitting in an armchair near the window overlooking the garden, Louisa absently leafed through a novel. 3 days had passed since her meeting with Raphael at the bookstore. 3 days of constant surveillance, superficial conversations, forced smiles. Theodore had installed more cameras around the house. For security, he said, and Caroline now accompanied her even during her painting sessions in the atelier. You enjoy reading very much, ma'am, Caroline commented, dusting books on a nearby shelf. It wasn't an observation, but a way to remind Louisa that she was being watched. I've always loved literature, Louisa replied, turning a page of the novel. My father taught me to love books since I was little. The mention of her father reminded Louisa of the last call she had made to him 2 days ago. A brief conversation with Theodore by her side, attentive to every word. Edmund seemed well. adapted to the small apartment in New York City, but Louisa perceived a concern in his voice that he tried to hide. "We're fine. Daughter," he would say, while Louisa imagined the opposite. "The important thing is that you're happy." Happy, a word that had lost its meaning. On the page of the novel she pretended to read, Louisa noticed a blank space in the bottom margin. A sudden impulse took hold of her. Taking advantage of a moment when Caroline moved away to get more cleaning supplies, she took a fine pen from her purse and quickly wrote in the margin of the book, "If anyone ever finds these words, I am trapped in a life I did not choose. My name is Louisa Hayes. I was not always Mrs. Maxwell." It was a small act, almost childish in its simplicity, but it gave Louisa a sense of power she hadn't experienced in a long time. Leaving a mark, a testimony, was a way of asserting that she still existed beyond the role she was forced to play. When Caroline returned, the book was already closed on Louisa's lap, who was looking thoughtfully out the window. In the following days, that small act of rebellion transformed into a secret project. In every book she took from the library, Louisa left a hidden message. Some were confessions. "I married to save my father. Not for love." Others were memories. At 12, I painted my first picture, a boat sailing under the Newport Cove moonlight. Some were dreams. "I want to feel the wind on my face without asking permission." And some, just her true name, repeated like a mantra, "Louisa Hayes, Louisa Hayes, Louisa Hayes." It was risky but calculated. Theodore rarely entered the library, and Caroline, though vigilant, didn't have the habit of leafing through books. Besides, there were hundreds of them. The chance of someone finding her messages was minimal. What mattered was the act itself, the small affirmation of autonomy in a world where she had none. Meanwhile, Theodore's behavior became increasingly erratic. Raphael's withdrawal from the resort project had triggered a series of financial problems that he desperately tried to hide. Long closed-door calls, emergency meetings with partners, nocturnal visits from local politicians, everything indicated that something was falling apart. "We need to host a dinner party," he announced one morning during breakfast. "The most elegant this city has ever seen. I want all the important names from New York City and Miami here next weekend." Louisa stared at him, surprised by the sudden change in mood. "I thought we were saving money." A careful lie. She should never know about the financial problems, but overheard conversations behind doors revealed the truth. The look Theodore gave her was icy. "Don't worry about money. Worry about being the perfect hostess. I want these imbeciles so impressed that they won't think twice before investing." "Of course," she agreed automatically. "I'll speak with the caterer and the decorator today." "Excellent." Theodore smiled, that smile that never reached his eyes. "Oh, and Louisa, invite Raphael King." The request caught her completely off guard. "King, I thought you too." That the deal hadn't gone through. "Business is like the sea, dear. Low tide is always followed by high tide." Theodore calmly drank his coffee. "Besides, King can be useful in other ways. He has influence in circles I haven't conquered yet." Something in his tone made Louisa uneasy. A plan was in motion, something beyond a simple social dinner. "How should I contact him?" "I don't have his number." "Use the company's. Caroline will help you." Theodore stood up, adjusting his impeccable suit. "And Louisa? Be especially as persuasive. King seems to have a soft spot for you, and we can use that to our advantage." The comment hit her like a slap. So Theodore knew, or at least suspected, something between her and Raphael. He was testing her, observing her reaction. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I barely know Mr. King." Theodore leaned in, touching her face with false tenderness. "We all have our talents, dear. Yours is being adorable and naive. Use it." When he left, Louisa remained seated, her hands trembling slightly under the table. The request to invite Raphael was a trap. But for whom? For her to test her loyalty? Or for Raphael, to lure him into some kind of ambush? That afternoon, under Caroline's discreet but constant supervision, Louisa made the call to Raphael's office. She was answered by an efficient secretary who promised to convey the invitation. An hour later, she received the reply. Raphael King was pleased to accept the Maxwell's dinner invitation for next Saturday. The rest of the week was consumed by preparations, hiring a specialized caterer, impeccable decoration, a carefully selected guest list. Theodore spared no expense, as if he wanted to prove something, perhaps to himself, perhaps to others, about his financial stability. While supervising the flower arrangements, Louisa constantly thought about the USB drive hidden in the dry paint in her atelier. She needed to find a way to access it again, to send the code message Raphael had mentioned. But how with so many eyes on her? The opportunity arose unexpectedly on the eve of the dinner. One of the table arrangements arrived in the wrong colors, and Louisa, on an impulse, offered to correct them. "I can paint some of the white flowers with soft shades of blue," she suggested to the decorator. "I have special paints in my atelier that would work perfectly." The idea pleased everyone, including Theodore, who praised her creative initiative. With his approval, Louisa could finally return to her space, though still under Caroline's watchful eye. "I'll need privacy to concentrate," Louisa said when they arrived at the atelier. "If you keep watching me, I might get distracted and ruin the flowers." Caroline hesitated, clearly conflicted between Theodore's instructions to watch her and the risk of compromising preparations for the important dinner. "I'll stay out here," the housekeeper finally decided. "The door will be open." It was enough. Inside the atelier, Louisa worked quickly. First, she began painting some flowers with broad visible strokes for anyone looking through the door. Then, while talking loudly about color combinations, she moved to an angle that blocked Caroline's view. With nimble fingers, she broke off a piece of the dry paint where she had hidden the USB drive. The small device was intact. She quickly connected it to her cell phone, a basic model Theodore allowed her to use only for emergencies, and opened the instruction file. The text was simple and direct. A phone number and the code word Aurora. That was all she needed to send to activate Raphael's rescue plan. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type the message that would change everything. But something stopped her. Tomorrow's dinner. Raphael would be there on Theodore's territory. If she sent the message now, what would happen? A police raid? A public confrontation? Whatever Raphael's plan, executing it during an event full of powerful politicians and businessmen, all Theodore's allies, seemed dangerously imprudent. She decided to wait. She would use the dinner to warn Raphael personally, to find a moment of private conversation, and plan the next steps more carefully. She disconnected the USB drive and hid it inside the lining of her makeup bag, a place Caroline rarely checked. The flowers were a success. Louisa's artistic touch transformed the ordinary arrangements into unique pieces that impressed even Theodore. "You have talent," he admitted, observing the final result. "I always knew I chose well." The comment, which should have sounded like a compliment, only reinforced for Louisa her condition as property, an object acquired for its attributes. But she smiled and thanked him, like the perfect wife she was forced to be. On the morning of the dinner, Louisa woke with a sense of urgency and fear. Something in the air and the atmosphere of the house seemed heavy with foreboding. The staff moved faster than usual. Caroline was especially tense, and Theodore smiled too much. "Today is a big day," he said, watching her apply makeup for the event. "A day that could change many things." She looked at him through the mirror's reflection. "I hope it's a success." "Oh, it will be." Theodore's smile held something predatory, "especially when we reveal the surprise of the night." Surprise? Louisa's heart quickened. "What surprise?" Theodore approached, adjusting his impeccable tie. "It would spoil it if I told you now, wouldn't it?" He kissed her lightly on the neck, a gesture that made her suppress a shiver. "Wear the red dress. The one I chose in New York City." The red dress, elegant yet too revealing for her taste, made for display, not for comfort. As the night approached, the mansion transformed. Strategically placed lights highlighted the colonial architecture. Impeccably set tables filled the inner courtyard. A small orchestra tuned instruments in the garden corner. Uniformed waiters prepared trays of canapés and champagne flutes. At 8 o'clock sharp, dressed in the required red, hair and makeup flawless, Louisa stood beside Theodore to receive the first guests. Mayors, state secretaries, influential businessmen, all arrived with rehearsed smiles and expensive gifts. At 8:45, Raphael King arrived. Elegant in his tuxedo but without ostentation, he stood out for his naturalness, amidst the artificiality of the event. As he greeted Louisa, he held her hand a second longer than protocol required. "You look stunning," he said, with sincerity in his voice. "Thank you for coming," she replied, aware of Theodore's attentive gaze a few steps away. "I hope you enjoy the evening." Something in Raphael's eyes conveyed a silent message, caution perhaps, or preparation. As the dinner progressed, Louisa felt the tension rise. Theodore was exceptionally sociable, circulating among guests with studied charm, paying special attention to Raphael, who responded with polite but clearly reserved cordiality. "Your husband seems lively tonight," commented Dr. Beatrice Smith, the gynecologist who weeks earlier had offered Louisa help, and who was attending as a local politician's escort. "Yes, this dinner is very important to him," Louisa replied automatically. "And for you?" The doctor watched her with genuine attention. "How have you been feeling?" The question, so simple and direct, caught Louisa off guard. No one had asked her about her feelings in so long that she had almost forgotten how to answer. She hesitated, momentarily vulnerable. "I'm surviving." Beatrice lightly squeezed her hand. "If you need to talk, you know where to find me." It was at that moment that Theodore appeared by her side, as if materializing out of nowhere. "Doctor, what a pleasure to have you here. I hope you're enjoying the evening." "Indeed," Beatrice replied with a professional smile. "Your wife is a wonderful hostess." "Yes, I am very lucky." Theodore possessively clasped Louisa's waist. "If you'll excuse us, it's almost time for the special announcement." When the doctor moved away, Theodore leaned in to whisper in Louisa's ear, "Remember to smile during the announcement. No matter what happens, keep smiling." Before she could ask what he meant, Theodore was already leading her to the center of the courtyard, where the small orchestra paused its music so he could speak. "Dear friends," Theodore began, his voice amplified by the discreet microphone he wore, "I thank you all for your presence on this special night. As you know, I rarely host events of this magnitude without a significant reason." Louisa scanned the audience, trying to locate Raphael. She found him near one of the colonial columns, seemingly relaxed, but with attentive eyes that missed no movement. "Today," Theodore continued, "I have the pleasure of announcing not only a new venture, but a new partnership that promises to transform the New York State coast." Interested murmurs rippled through the hall. Louisa felt Theodore's arm tightening around her waist with unnecessary force. "And to make this moment even more special, I've brought a surprise guest." Theodore gestured to one of the security guards, who opened a side door. "Someone very dear to my wife." Louisa's heart stopped as she saw who entered, supported by two men. Her father, Edmund Hayes, thin, aged, with a sickly pallor, but unmistakably her father. "Dad!" The word escaped her lips before she could contain it. Edmund smiled weakly upon seeing her, his eyes shining with contained emotion. He seemed confused, as if not fully understanding what was happening. "My father-in-law agreed to join us for this special moment," Theodore explained to the guests, "to witness the announcement of the partnership between Maxwell Enterprises and King Tech for the largest eco-resort ever built in the country." A buzz of surprise swept through the room. All eyes turned to Raphael King, who seemed as surprised as the others. "Unfortunately," Raphael corrected, his clear voice cutting through the murmur of the audience, "there must be some mistake. There is no partnership between my company and Maxwell Enterprises." Theodore's smile faltered for a second, but he quickly recomposed himself. "Perhaps I spoke too soon. Let's say then that this dinner marks the beginning of official negotiations." Raphael took a few steps forward, approaching the center. "With all due respect, Theodore, there are no negotiations underway. I was quite clear in our last conversation." A tense silence filled the room. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Edmund, still supported by the two men, seemed increasingly confused. Louisa realized what was happening. Theodore had brought her father not as a pleasant surprise, but as a form of pressure, a public reminder of the power he wielded over her. And the false announcement of the partnership with Raphael was a desperate attempt to force him into an agreement, using social pressure and the presence of so many influential figures. "I'm sure we can resolve any misunderstanding," Theodore said with a forced laugh. "In the meantime, let's enjoy this beautiful evening. The orchestra has a special repertoire prepared." As the music resumed and guests tried to restart their conversations, Louisa broke free from Theodore's arm and rushed to her father. "Dad, how are you?" She hugged him carefully, noticing how much he had lost weight. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "It was a last-minute decision," Edmund explained, his voice weak. "Theodore insisted it would be a wonderful surprise for you." "And it was." Louisa smiled, trying to hold back tears. "I missed you so much." "Me too, daughter." Edmund held her hands, looking into her eyes. "But something is wrong, isn't it? You don't seem happy." Before she could answer, Theodore reappeared by her side. "I will escort Edmund to the guest room. The trip tired him and he needs to rest." The doctors were clear about not overexerting himself. Louisa wanted to protest. She wanted more time with her father, more moments outside Theodore's constant vigilance. But Edmund's fragile health was visible, and the weariness in his eyes genuine. "Rest? Dad, we'll talk calmly tomorrow." Edmund nodded, giving her one last worried look before being led inside the house. Louisa stood still, watching him walk away, feeling torn between the joy of seeing him and the dread of what his presence meant in the game Theodore was playing. "Mrs. Maxwell." Raphael's voice brought her back to reality. He was by her side, offering a glass of champagne. "Mr. King," she replied automatically, accepting the drink. "Your father seems like a remarkable man," Raphael commented, looking in the direction Edmund had disappeared. "I'm sorry he's having health problems." "Yes, he is." Louisa hesitated, aware of the curious glances around them. "Extraordinary. I'd like to discuss the art exhibition we visited," Raphael continued in a casual tone. "There's one piece in particular that intrigued me. Perhaps we could take a walk in the garden while we discuss art." The invitation was transparent in its real intention, but phrased innocently enough not to raise suspicion. "Of course," Louisa agreed, trying to match his casualness. "The garden is especially beautiful tonight." As they moved away from the crowd, towards the more secluded part of the garden, Louisa felt her heart race. She would finally have the chance to speak with Raphael, to warn him about what was happening, to ask for help. Chapter 6. Confrontations and Revelations. The colonial mansion's garden extended far beyond what guests could see. Beyond the illuminated spaces, where marble tables and decorative sculptures impressed visitors, there was a wilder area, with ancient trees and a small ornamental lake. It was to this refuge that Raphael and Louisa headed, walking side by side in a silence charged with tension. "We are being watched," Raphael murmured, when they reached the shaded area by a large oak tree. "There are at least 2 men following us since we left the courtyard." Louisa wasn't surprised. "Theodore leaves nothing to chance." "Your father seemed disoriented," Raphael commented, maintaining a casual expression as he spoke in a low voice. "Did you know he was coming?" "No, it was completely unexpected." Louisa nervously adjusted her shawl over her shoulders. "He was in New York City, supposedly under medical care. I don't understand why Theodore brought him here, especially to announce a partnership that doesn't exist." Raphael observed her intently. "It's a desperate move. In recent weeks, my investigations have advanced significantly. We found concrete evidence linking Theodore to money laundering schemes and land grabbing. 3 of his main investors withdrew support after information began to circulate discreetly. So that's why he's so eager for your investment. He needs the credibility your name would bring." "Exactly. And when he realized I wouldn't yield, he decided to force the situation publicly." Raphael paused, looking up at the starry sky. "Bringing your father was the lowest blow. He's using him as a form of pressure, a reminder that he controls something precious to both of us. That us did not go unnoticed by Louisa. It was the first time Raphael included himself in the equation, openly revealing that he cared not only out of gratitude to the professor, but for her as well. "Raphael, I found microphones in my room, in my atelier. I'm being monitored constantly." Louisa moved closer, pretending to admire an orchid so that potential observers wouldn't suspect. "I think Theodore suspects something between us ever since the art gallery. We need to act fast then." Raphael also approached the flower. "I have everything prepared. A legal team ready to present the evidence to the district attorney's office, security for you and your father. A safe location in New York City, where you can stay while everything is resolved." "When?" "Originally, I planned for next week, But with your father here and the situation clearly deteriorating, Raphael hesitated. We can execute the plan tomorrow. Louisa's heart raced. Tomorrow. The possibility of freedom was just hours away. How do I... Her question was interrupted by nearby footsteps. Ah, there you are. Theodore's artificially cheerful voice cut through the night. Enjoying the garden, I see. Louisa has a special talent with plants, doesn't she, dear? Louisa forced a smile. I was just showing Mr. King the rare orchids. Fascinating, no doubt. Theodore smiled, but his eyes remained cold. However, we have guests waiting. As hosts, our place is with them. The firm hand on her elbow left no room for discussion. Louisa cast one last meaningful look at Raphael before being led back to the party. The rest of the night unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Louisa smiled, chatted, played the role of perfect hostess, but her mind was elsewhere, torn between concern for her father, the growing tension between Theodore and Raphael, and the terrifying yet liberating prospect of the next day's plan. When the last guest finally said goodbye, it was past 1 in the morning. Theodore, who had drunk more than usual, had a flushed face and slightly uncoordinated movements, but his eyes, those calculating eyes, remained as sharp as ever. A success, don't you think? He commented, unbuttoning his jacket as he entered the couple's bedroom. Despite the small disagreement with King. It was a beautiful event, Louisa replied cautiously. The guests seemed impressed with everything. King didn't accept the invitation for brunch tomorrow. Theodore watched her reflection in the mirror as he loosened his tie. Strange, isn't it? After all the time he spent talking to you in the garden, Louisa felt a chill run down her spine. Perhaps he has other commitments. Perhaps, Theodore turned, facing her directly. Or perhaps he's planning something. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, dear? How could I know? Louisa kept her voice steady despite her growing fear. I barely know him. Theodore approached slowly, his steps deliberately measured. It's curious how people who barely know each other can spend so much time looking at the same orchid. The veiled threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Louisa instinctively recoiled, but her back hit the wall. There was nowhere to run. We were just talking about art, she insisted. Art? Theodore laughed, a humorless sound. You've always been a terrible liar, Louisa. It's part of your charm. He raised his hand, touching her face with false tenderness. But I'm willing to overlook any indiscretion. After all, we have a special guest. Your father seems so fragile, doesn't he? It would be tragic if the excitement of being here was too much for his weakened heart. Louisa's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Leave my father out of this. It depends entirely on you, my dear. Theodore cut her off abruptly. King obviously has some interest in you. Use it. Convince him to reconsider the investment. To whatever is necessary. You're asking me to... I'm asking you to save everything we've built, Theodore cut her off sharply. And more importantly, to ensure your father continues to receive the best care. King will be at the hotel until tomorrow afternoon. You have until then. When they finally lay down, Louisa remained awake, staring at the ceiling. Beside her, Theodore slept, or pretended to sleep. It didn't matter. The ultimatum was given: seduce Raphael to save her father, or face consequences she dared not imagine. But there was another way. Raphael's plan scheduled for the next day. If she could warn him about the new threat, perhaps they could speed everything up, act before Theodore realized. In the next room, her father slept, unaware of the drama unfolding around him. His presence in the mansion was both a comfort and a torture, so close, yet still hostage to the same invisible chains that bound her. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, and Theodore's breathing indicated deep sleep, Louisa made her decision. With silent movements, she got out of bed. She needed to get to her atelier, retrieve the USB drive hidden in her makeup bag, and somehow send the message to Raphael. The hallway was dark and silent. With light steps, Louisa went first to the guest room where her father was staying. She needed to see him to make sure he was all right, that it wasn't just a hallucination caused by despair. The door was unlocked. Inside the luxuriously decorated room, Edmund slept in a king-size bed that seemed to swallow him. Even in the dim light, Louisa could see how much he had aged in the months since her marriage. His hair, once only graying, was completely white. His face thinner, marked by deep lines of worry even in sleep. "Dad," she whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking his wrinkled hand in hers. "We're going to get out of here." "I promise." Edmund slowly opened his eyes, taking a few seconds to recognize her in the darkness. "Louisa, what is it, daughter?" "Shh, it's okay. I just wanted to see how you are." He struggled to sit up, leaning back against the pillows. "Actually, it's not okay, is it? I see it in your eyes." Even debilitated, even after months apart, he still knew her better than anyone. Louisa felt the tears she had held back for so long finally overflow. "Oh, Dad," her voice broke in a contained sob. Edmund squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "I never wanted this for you. When I learned of the agreement with Maxwell, I tried to stop it. I would have preferred 1,000 times to leave this world than to see you sacrifice your life for mine. I had no choice," Louisa murmured. "He would have cut off your treatment, everything." "There's always a choice, daughter." The professor's eyes, though tired, shone with determination. "And it's never too late to make the right one." "That's what I intend to do, Dad, tomorrow." Louisa took a deep breath. "Tomorrow everything will change." Before she could explain, a noise in the hallway alarmed her. Footsteps, probably Caroline doing her nightly rounds. "I have to go. Go back to sleep, Dad. We'll talk tomorrow." Edmund nodded, squeezing her hand one last time before letting go. "Whatever your decision, I will be by your side. Always." Louisa left the room silently, pressing herself against the wall when she saw Caroline's silhouette at the end of the hallway. She waited for the housekeeper to turn the corner before quickly heading to the garden, where her atelier awaited. The night was surprisingly cold for Newport Cove. A fine mist hung over the garden, giving the statues and trees ghostly shapes. Louisa quickened her pace, feeling the damp grass under her bare feet. The atelier was exactly as she had left it, the canvases covered, the brushes lined up, the paint pots organized. With trembling fingers, Louisa opened the drawer where she kept her personal materials and took out her makeup bag. The USB drive was still there, safe in the lining. But how to use it? There was no computer in the atelier, and returning to the mansion with the device would be too risky. It was then that she remembered her cell phone. The basic model Theodore allowed her to use had a USB port. It might not be compatible with the USB drive, but it was worth a try. With trembling hands, she connected the small device to the phone. To her relief, the screen recognized the connection. Quickly, she located the file with the instructions and the emergency contact number. She typed the message, just one word, Aurora, and sent it to the indicated number. Seconds later, she received an automatic reply. "Message received. Stay calm. Await instructions." She had done it. The plan was in motion. She disconnected the USB drive, hiding it again, and prepared to return to the house. It was then that she heard the atelier door open behind her. "So this is where you hide to conspire." Theodore's voice froze her in place. Turning slowly, Louisa found her husband standing in the doorway, still wearing the silk robe he used for sleeping. His eyes, however, were perfectly alert. "I couldn't sleep," she explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "I came to get something to read." In the dark, Theodore entered, closing the door behind him. Without turning on the lights? A curious reading method. Louisa took a step back. "The moon is bright. I didn't want to wake you. Always so considerate." Theodore smiled, that smile that never reached his eyes. "Or perhaps so desperate that you make mistakes." He raised his hand, showing a small metallic object. Louisa recognized it with horror. The USB drive, but how? She had just hidden it. Looking for this. Theodore twirled the device between his fingers. "Caroline found it this afternoon during cleaning. Interesting content, especially the part about how to destroy my reputation and my businesses." Louisa's blood ran cold. If he had the original USB drive, then what she had just used? "A copy," Theodore confirmed, as if reading her thoughts. "I replaced the original with a replica. I wanted to see what you would do with it." He took a step forward, fury now evident in every line of his face. "And you didn't disappoint me." "Aurora. An interesting code." "For what exactly? An invasion, an escape?" Louisa knew that denying it would be useless. She straightened her shoulders, finding a reserve of courage she didn't even know she possessed. "For freedom," she replied simply. Theodore's hand moved so quickly that she barely had time to register it. The slap hit her face with enough force to make her stumble backward, colliding with the workbench. "Freedom?" he roared, the mask of civility completely abandoned. "After everything I've done for you." "For your father? Is this your gratitude?" Louisa brought her hand to her face, tasting the metallic tang of blood where her lip had split. "You never did anything for us. You just used us. I saved his life and turned me into a prisoner in return." Theodore advanced again, but this time Louisa was prepared. She dodged, putting the table between them. "Raphael knows everything," she said, keeping her distance. "About your illegal businesses, about the way you treat me, everything. If anything happens to me or my father, the evidence will be handed over to the authorities immediately." A flicker of doubt crossed Theodore's face, quickly replaced by a cold smile. "Interesting bluff, but I doubt King has concrete evidence." "No one does. Now, are you sure?" "Your empire is crumbling, Theodore. Investors are pulling out. The politicians you bought are starting to fear for their own reputations. Why do you think you were so desperate for Raphael's investment?" The truth in her words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, Theodore seemed smaller, older, not the confident predator, but a cornered man. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," he finally said, his voice dangerously low. "King may have money and influence, but I have connections he can't even imagine. People who would do anything for me, no questions asked." His tone left no doubt. It was a direct threat not only to her, but to Raphael. Louisa felt fear tighten her chest, not for herself, but for the man who risked everything to help her. "It's too late," she declared, with more confidence than she felt. "The message has already been sent. The plan is already in motion." Theodore studied her for a long moment, as if assessing the veracity of her words. Finally, he let out a short, humorless laugh. "Then we'll have to speed things up, won't we?" He walked to the door, stopping for an instant. "I think your father is having a relapse. Perhaps he needs to be transferred to a remote hospital. And as for you," the look he cast upon her was laden with dark promises, "you will learn that there are consequences for betrayal." When the door closed behind him, Louisa felt her legs weaken. She fell to her knees, trembling uncontrollably. The message she had sent, where had it gone? Would the number on the fake device be the same as the original? Or had Theodore altered that too, redirecting her plea for help into the void? One thing was certain: she couldn't stay there waiting to find out. If Theodore was truly planning to use her father as an instrument of revenge, she needed to act immediately, with or without Raphael's help. Gathering all her courage, Louisa left the atelier. The garden, once so beautiful in daylight, seemed menacing under the diffuse moonlight. Every shadow potentially harbored one of Theodore's men. Every noise could be an approaching step. But the fear for her father's safety outweighed any concern for herself. With determined steps, she headed for the mansion, determined to reach Edmund's room before Theodore could implement any plan he had formulated. As she approached the side entrance, however, she noticed unusual movement. Lights were turning on in rooms that should have been empty at that hour. Male voices, tense and authoritative, echoed through the corridors. And more alarmingly, the unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps descending the main stairs. Hiding behind a large fern, Louisa watched through the window. Two men she didn't recognize, they weren't regular mansion staff, carried her father down the hallway. Edmund seemed semi-conscious, murmuring weak protests that were ignored by the men. "Hurry," one of them ordered. "The car is waiting in the back." Panic seized Louisa. They were taking her father away, exactly as Theodore had threatened. Without thinking of the consequences, she ran to the nearest door, determined to prevent her father from being removed from the mansion. But before she could reach the entrance, she felt a strong arm wrap around her waist, pulling her back. A hand covered her mouth, stifling the scream she tried to let out. "Shh, it's me," a familiar voice whispered in her ear. "Don't scream! Raphael!" The relief was so intense that her legs almost gave way again. "They're taking my father," she managed to say when he removed his hand from her mouth. "I know. My men are already in position to intercept them." Raphael quickly led her away from the house, towards a cluster of trees where a dark vehicle waited, almost invisible in the darkness. "The message you sent arrived. We had to accelerate the whole plan. But how did you get in here? The property has security all around." A slight smile curved Raphael's lips. Let's just say my resources go beyond money and technology. I have very skilled people working with me. In the dark, Louisa could distinguish other figures moving silently around the mansion, men and women dressed in black, with equipment that suggested more than mere private security. The operation seemed meticulously planned, as if Raphael had been prepared for this moment for weeks. And Theodore? He knows about the USB drive, about everything. At this moment, he is being detained, officially by federal agents investigating money laundering, unofficially. Raphael paused significantly. Let's just say some of his former associates were more than willing to provide information in exchange for immunity. Theodore Maxwell will no longer pose a threat to you. A sound of struggle coming from the direction of the mansion caught her attention. Lights flashed, excited voices echoed in the night. Louisa saw the car transporting her father being intercepted by two black vehicles that appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "My father will be with us in moments," Raphael assured her. "I have a medical team waiting at the hotel. He will receive the best care." The promise had barely been made when a familiar figure appeared, supported by two men dressed in what looked like medical uniforms. Edmund walked slowly, still looking confused but visibly relieved to see his daughter. "Louisa!" "Dad!" She ran to meet him, hugging him carefully, fearing she might hurt him in his fragility. "Are you all right?" "Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine, daughter." Edmund held her face in his trembling hands, examining her injured lip with a worried expression. "But you—" "It's nothing," Louisa quickly assured him. "The important thing is that we're together now." Raphael approached, extending his hand to Edmund. "Professor Hayes, it's an honor to finally meet you again." Edmund studied Raphael's face for a moment, understanding slowly dawning in his tired eyes. "The young man from the tech project, you changed." "Thanks to you, Professor." Raphael smiled, gratitude evident in his gaze. "Now it's my turn to return the favor." One of Raphael's men approached hastily. "Sir, we need to go. Federal agents are on their way, and it would be best if we weren't here when they arrive." Raphael nodded, resuming his commanding posture. "Let's go. The helicopter is waiting 2 kilometers from here. We'll head to New York City immediately." As she helped Edmund into the vehicle, Louisa cast one last look at the colonial mansion that had been her prison for so many months. Lights on in every room revealed moving shadows, the police operation already underway. In one of the second-floor windows, she glimpsed Theodore's unmistakable silhouette, surrounded by uniformed men. Even at a distance, she felt the weight of his gaze, the silent promise of revenge. "He can no longer reach you," Raphael said, as if reading her thoughts. "The evidence is overwhelming. Theodore Maxwell won't be out of prison anytime soon." Louisa got into the car, sitting beside her father. For the first time in many months, she allowed herself a sigh of true relief. It wasn't just the end of a nightmare. It was the beginning of something new, still uncertain, but infinitely more promising than anything she had known in the past year. As the vehicle moved silently down the dark road, leaving the lights of the mansion behind, Louisa rested her head on her father's shoulder. The path ahead was unknown, but one thing was certain. For the first time since she accepted Theodore's agreement, she was truly free. Chapter 7. Rebirth. The sun rose over New York City as the helicopter landed on the private helipad atop one of Fifth Avenue's most exclusive skyscrapers. Louisa watched the city awaken, a spectacle of lights, colors, and movement that seemed to reflect her own state of mind. After darkness, light. After confinement, vastness. Beside her, Edmund slept peacefully. During the flight, the accompanying doctor had administered medication to help him rest, ensuring his fragile heart wouldn't suffer from the tension of recent events. "He'll be fine," Raphael assured her, noticing her worried gaze. "The clinic we're taking him to has the best cardiologists in the country." Louisa nodded, grateful for the 1,000th time that night. "I don't know how to thank you for all this." "You don't have to." Raphael smiled, that genuine smile that lit up his eyes. "Your father did the same for me when no one else believed in my potential. I'm just closing a circle." When the helicopter completed its landing, a small team was already waiting for them. Doctors, security guards, efficient assistants who seemed to know exactly what to do. With meticulous care, Edmund was transferred to a stretcher and escorted to the elevator that would take him directly to the ambulance waiting in the garage. Go with him, Raphael encouraged. Noticing Louisa's hesitation, I'll handle the practical details and we'll meet at the clinic. St. Hope's Clinic occupied a modern building in the Upper East Side. Unlike the cold, impersonal hospitals Louisa knew, the place resembled a luxury hotel, with spacious suites, indoor gardens, and an attentive staff who treated each patient with dignity and respect. Dr. Alexander Newman, head of the cardiology team, thoroughly examined Edmund upon their arrival. Louisa waited anxiously in the corridor when the doctor finally emerged from the room. "How is he, doctor?" "Considering everything, surprisingly well." The doctor consulted his notes. The previous surgery was well executed, but the post-operative care was lacking. There are signs that the medication was not being administered in the correct doses. Louisa felt a shiver of anger. Theodore had assured her that her father received the best care, but apparently it was another one of his lies. "Can we reverse the damage?" "Largely, yes. We will start a new treatment protocol immediately. Professor Hayes has a strong constitution, despite his fragile appearance." The doctor smiled gently. "He told me a lot about you while I was examining him. He is extremely proud of his daughter." The words warmed Louisa's heart. Despite all the sacrifice, all the pain, her father's love remained unwavering. "When can I see him?" "Right now." "He's resting but conscious." In the spacious, comfortable room, Edmund already seemed to have regained some color. He smiled as he saw his daughter enter, extending his hand to her. "It seems we are finally safe," he commented, when Louisa sat beside the bed. "Yes, Dad, finally." She held his wrinkled hand, noticing how it seemed smaller, more fragile than in her memories. "The doctor said you'll recover quickly with the right treatment. It's not my health that worries me, daughter. It's yours." Edmund's tired eyes studied her face, lingering on the still swollen lip where Theodore had hit her. "What did that man do to you?" Louisa hesitated. Her instinct was to protect her father, to spare him painful details. But she had lied for too long, hidden too much. "He turned me into property, Dad. He controlled everything. What I wore, ate, said. He isolated me from everyone and everything I loved. Every day was—" Her voice faltered. It was surviving, not living. Tears streamed down Edmund's wrinkled face. "My dear daughter, if I had known, I would have preferred 1,000 times to leave this world than to see you suffer like this." "Don't say that," Louisa squeezed his hand tighter. "I made a choice, the only choice I could make under those circumstances, and now we are here together and free. That's what matters." Edmund wiped his tears with his free hand. "That young man, Raphael, he seemed familiar, but my memory is not what it used to be. He was your student years ago, the student for whom you mortgaged our house, remember? To help him develop a technology project." Understanding illuminated the professor's eyes. "The young man with the educational software, of course. He seemed promising, but I never imagined he would become so successful. He says he owes everything to you. That your gesture of trust changed his life." Edmund smiled, his expression softening the lines of worry on his face. "I've always believed in human potential above all else. Deep down, that's what truly makes us rich, the ability to see value where others see only risk." A gentle knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Raphael entered, accompanied by a middle-aged woman wearing a medical coat. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "I'd like to introduce Dr. Elisa Montgomery. She will coordinate Professor Hayes's care and also—" He hesitated, looking significantly at Louisa. "I thought perhaps you might also want to talk to someone. Dr. Elisa is a psychologist, specializing in trauma and abusive relationships." Louisa felt a lump in her throat. It was the first time someone had explicitly named what she had experienced. Abuse. The word was frightening, laden with meanings she wasn't yet ready to face. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Perhaps soon." Raphael nodded, understanding. "No pressure. I just want you to know that support is available when you're ready." Dr. Elisa smiled gently. "I'll be around for the next few days, overseeing the professor's multidisciplinary team. Whenever you want to talk about anything, my door will be open." After a brief conversation about Edmund's next treatment steps, the doctor withdrew to supervise the installation of new monitoring equipment. "You'll stay here until the situation stabilizes," Raphael explained. "Then, if you prefer, I have an apartment prepared in the same building where I live, completely secure with access to the clinic whenever necessary." That's very generous, Edmund commented. But we don't want to be a burden. A burden? Raphael laughed, genuinely surprised. Professor, without you, I'd probably be selling pirated software on some street corner in the Lower East Side, not building one of the country's largest technology companies. The simplicity and sincerity of the comment drew smiles from all three. What about Theodore? Louisa finally asked, vocalizing the fear that still lingered in her mind. He has powerful connections. Raphael's expression grew serious. The evidence we gathered is irrefutable. Money laundering, tax evasion, bribery of public officials, falsification of environmental documents for the resort construction. The list is long. He paused, weighing his next words. Furthermore, several of his former associates are already collaborating with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. Theodore is isolated. But does that mean I'll have to testify? The thought of facing Theodore in court made Louisa's stomach churn. Not necessarily. Financial crimes are the main focus of the investigation. If you choose to testify about the personal abuses, you will have all the necessary legal and psychological support. But the decision is entirely yours. Edmund squeezed his daughter's hand in silent support. I need to think about it, Louisa decided. The mere thought of publicly reliving months of psychological terror was overwhelming. Of course, Raphael checked his watch. Now I think you two need to rest. I'll be back tonight to see how you're doing. When he turned to leave, Louisa impulsively stood up. Raphael, wait. Can I speak with you in the hallway? Outside the room, away from her father's ears, Louisa finally asked the question that had bothered her since their escape. Why did you really do all this? I know you feel indebted to my father, but the risk, the investment, the personal exposure, it goes far beyond gratitude. Raphael looked at her for a long moment before answering. When I lost my sister to an abusive relationship, I swore I would never again be passive in the face of a similar situation. Then when I discovered that the daughter of the man who saved my life was living the same nightmare. He paused, his eyes darkening with the painful memory. Let's just say it became personal on several levels. And now, what happens to us? A slight smile appeared on Raphael's lips. That depends entirely on you, Louisa. I have no expectations, no demands. I just wish for you to find your own path, to reclaim the freedom that was stolen from you. There was something so genuinely detached in those words that Louisa felt an almost overwhelming wave of emotion. After so long of being treated as an object, as property, the idea of having choices, true choices, was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Thank you, she whispered, unable to adequately express what she felt. Rest, he replied simply. The future can wait a little longer. The following days passed at a tranquil, almost surreal pace after months of constant tension. Edmund's condition visibly improved under the specialized team's care. Conversations with Dr. Elisa, initially hesitant, became a safe haven where Louisa could finally name and process the trauma she had experienced. Raphael visited them daily, always respectful, never imposing his presence. He brought books for Edmund, painting supplies for Louisa, and news from the outside world that gradually ceased to seem threatening. It was during one of these visits, 2 weeks after the escape, that Louisa made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. I want to travel, she announced suddenly, as they had dinner in the clinic's small inner garden. Alone. Raphael and Edmund exchanged surprised glances. Where to, daughter? The professor asked cautiously. I don't know yet. Maybe Europe, maybe the Hamptons. Somewhere where no one knows me as Theodore Maxwell's wife. Louisa took a deep breath, feeling the liberation that came with the words. I need to rediscover who I am when I'm not trying to survive or please anyone. A brief silence followed her declaration. Louisa expected resistance, concern, perhaps even disapproval. Instead, she found understanding. I think it's an excellent idea, Edmund finally said, his eyes shining with pride. You deserve this time for yourself. I agree. Raphael smiled, although Louisa could see a shadow of sadness in his gaze. I can arrange everything you need. Passport, secure accommodations, reliable contacts. I don't want to be a financial burden, Louisa protested. You've already done so much. Theodore's blocked funds were partially released to you as his wife, Raphael explained. Legally, you are entitled to a significant portion. Consider it a small compensation for what you suffered. The idea of using Theodore's money to finance her liberation had a certain poetic irony that Louisa couldn't help but appreciate. A week later, with her father comfortably settled in the apartment Raphael had promised, Louisa prepared to leave. She had chosen Portugal as her first destination. The familiarity of the language combined with the physical distance seemed the perfect balance. On the eve of her trip, Raphael invited her to a farewell dinner at his apartment. The place, though luxurious, reflected the owner's personality. Elegant without ostentation, sophisticated without exaggeration. Large windows offered a panoramic view of the city, millions of lights twinkling on the horizon. "It looks like an inverted sky," Louisa commented, observing the illuminated metropolis. "I always thought the same," Raphael agreed, pouring wine into 2 glasses, as if the stars had fallen to earth. There was a naturalness in their interaction that surprised Louisa. After everything they had been through together, the rescue, the escape, the weeks of recovery, it was almost strange to be there, simply having dinner and talking like 2 normal people. "I have something for you," Raphael said after the meal, handing her a small package. Inside, Louisa found a state-of-the-art smartphone, sleek and discreet. "It's more than a phone," he explained. "It's programmed with an exclusive security app. If you need help anywhere in the world, just press this icon and my team will be activated immediately." Louisa held the device, touched by the gesture. "I hope I won't need it." "Me too, but I'd like you to take it anyway." She nodded, putting the phone in her purse. "Thank you for this and for everything." A comfortable silence settled between them as they enjoyed the view, each lost in their own thoughts. "It will feel strange," Raphael commented finally, "after weeks focused on helping you and your father, to go back to a normal routine. Will you miss me?" The question escaped before Louisa could contain it, more direct and vulnerable than she intended. Raphael's dark eyes met hers with intensity. "Yes, more than I should, considering the circumstances." The honesty of the answer caught her off guard. Throughout the entire process, the rescue, the recovery, the preparations for the trip, Raphael had maintained a respectful distance, never hinting at any expectation beyond friendship. "I don't want you to think I have any kind of expectation," he continued, as if reading her thoughts. "You are just beginning to reclaim your freedom, to rediscover who you are. The last thing you need is someone trying to define your future," Louisa completed softly. "Exactly," Raphael smiled, a slightly melancholic smile. "Go explore the world, find your way. If you ever want to come back, I'll be here." The next morning, at JFK International Airport, Louisa bid farewell to her father. Edmund, already looking much healthier than weeks before, held his daughter's hands with barely contained emotion. "Promise you'll take care of yourself?" he asked. "And that you'll call regularly." "I promise, Dad." Louisa smiled, affectionately adjusting the scarf around his neck despite the New York City heat. "And you promise you'll follow all medical advice?" "Word of a retired professor." Edmund hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you, daughter. For your courage, your strength. I learned from the best." Louisa discreetly wiped away a tear. "Take care. I'll see you in a few months." To her surprise, Raphael had also come to the airport. He remained discreetly distant during the father-daughter farewell, approaching only when Edmund moved away to give them a moment alone. "Your flight is confirmed. The hotel suite reserved for 2 weeks," Raphael informed her, handing her an envelope with documents. "After that, the world is yours to explore as you wish." "Thank you for everything," Louisa said, feeling that words were inadequate to express her gratitude. Raphael smiled. "Have a good trip, Louisa Hayes." It was the first time he had deliberately called her by her maiden name, her true name. "Find your freedom." With a last hug to her father and a handshake with Raphael that lasted perhaps a second longer than necessary, Louisa headed to the boarding gate. Each step took her further from the past and closer to an uncertain future, but one that was genuinely her own. 6 months later, an art exhibition in Lisbon was attracting the attention of specialized critics. Titled Rebirth Fragments of Freedom, it featured intense and emotional works by a new Brazilian artist who was quickly gaining international recognition. "Her paintings capture the essence of human transformation," wrote an influential critic. "The journey from darkness to light, from confinement to freedom, resonates with an authenticity that can only come from lived experience. In the small apartment she had rented near the Tagus, Louisa read the reviews with a mixture of pride and disbelief. After spending 2 months in Portugal, she had traveled through Spain, France and Italy, absorbing art, culture, and, more importantly, rediscovering herself. Painting, which was once a refuge, had become full expression. Each canvas told a part of her story, not literally but emotionally. The pain, the fear, the hope, the liberation, all translated into colors and forms that spoke directly to the soul of those who contemplated them. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her father on his weekly call. Edmund was flourishing. The treatment in New York City had been so successful that doctors spoke of a miraculous recovery. He had even resumed some occasional lectures, sharing his vast experience with new students. "And how is Raphael?" Louisa asked casually, as she did on every call. "Busy as always," Edmund replied. "He just launched a scholarship program for young artists in underserved communities. I think someone inspired him in that direction." Louisa smiled, imagining the reserved billionaire dedicating part of his fortune to promote art among young people who, like her, one day had talent but lacked opportunities. After hanging up, Louisa opened her email. Among messages from gallery owners interested in her work and invitations for future exhibitions, there was a specific one that caught her attention: the confirmation of her return flight to the United States, scheduled for the following month, 6 months. The time she had stipulated for herself when she left, time to heal, to rediscover, to decide. On her desk beside the brushes and paints lay the catalogue of her exhibition. On the cover, her most acclaimed work, a woman emerging from structures resembling a cage, her arms outstretched towards a vibrant horizon, her serene face expressing not just freedom, but something more: the quiet certainty of someone who finally knows who she is and what she desires. It was time to go back. Not as the same person who had left, that traumatized, insecure young woman, still defined by what had been done to her. She would return as Louisa Hayes, recognized artist, strong woman, mistress of her own destiny, and perhaps, just perhaps, ready to discover if that look exchanged at the airport, that handshake that lasted a second longer, could be the beginning of something. Not a salvation, not a dependency, but a choice. A truly free choice. When the plane landed at JFK International Airport, Louisa felt an unexpected emotion. After half a year exploring the world, there was something deeply comforting in hearing Brazilian Portuguese around her again, in recognizing the faces, the gestures, the small cultural habits that constituted her roots. In the arrival hall, she searched for her father. They had agreed he would pick her up, eager to be the first to welcome her back. She found him easily, waving enthusiastically. Beside him, to Louisa's surprise, was Raphael. They had not communicated directly during her absence, a mutual decision to give her the space she so desperately needed. Seeing him there beside her father stirred an emotion she couldn't immediately name. "My daughter." Edmund hugged her with surprising strength for a man who months earlier had seemed so fragile. "How beautiful you are! And famous. They even talked about your exhibition on television." Louisa laughed, touched by her father's enthusiasm. "Your usual exaggeration." When she finally turned to Raphael, she found him watching her with an expression difficult to decipher. Admiration, certainly, but also something deeper, more contained. "Welcome back," he said simply. "Thank you," Louisa smiled. "I thought you'd be too busy with your projects to come to the airport." Some moments deserve priority. The answer, simple and direct, said much more than the words themselves. In the days that followed, Louisa readjusted to American life. She settled into her own apartment, not in Raphael's building, as he had originally suggested, but in a bohemian neighborhood of New York City, full of art galleries and cultural cafes. It was important for her to establish her own space, her own identity. News of her return spread quickly in the art world. Invitations for exhibitions, interviews, lectures arrived daily. The young artist who had conquered Europe was now celebrated in her own country. Raphael remained present, but always respecting her space. Occasional dinners, visits to exhibitions, conversations about art and technology, a bond that strengthened naturally, without pressure or declared expectations. It was during one of these evenings, after they had visited a digital art exhibition together, that Raphael invited her to see a special place. Driving through the illuminated city, they arrived at a quiet residential neighborhood on the outskirts of New York City. "Where are we going?" Louisa asked, curious. "A personal project," he replied enigmatically. The car stopped in front of a spacious wooded plot of land. A modern building with clean lines and large windows rose harmoniously integrated with the surrounding nature. "What is this place?" Raphael smiled, leading her down a stone path to the entrance. "See for yourself." Upon entering, Louisa found herself in a surprising space. The interior was an enormous art atelier. Perfect lighting, walls designed for exhibition, work areas equipped with the best available materials. Floor-to-ceiling windows allowed the exterior nature to become part of the creative environment. "It's incredible," she whispered, walking slowly through the space, touching equipment, observing every carefully planned detail. "It's an art center for young talents," Raphael explained. "Part of the foundation I created inspired by your father, but—" He hesitated briefly. "It was also designed with you in mind." Louisa turned to face him, surprised. "Not as pressure or expectation," he quickly continued. "Just as a possibility. A space where you could create, teach if you wanted to. Develop your work with complete freedom." "It's the most extraordinary atelier I've ever seen," Louisa admitted, genuinely touched by the gesture. "There's more." Raphael led her to a side door that opened into a small annex house. Elegant, comfortable, completely independent of the main center. A place to stay when you wanted to work late or, again, that hesitation. A place that could be yours if you ever decided that's what you want. Louisa looked around the space, then turned to Raphael. For months she had reflected on her life, her choices, her desires. She had explored the world, rediscovered her art, rebuilt her identity away from the shadows of the past. And in all those moments of self-discovery, a recurring thought, what would it be like to build something new, something genuine, with someone who truly saw her, not as property, not as a conquest, but as an equal? "Raphael," she began, carefully choosing her words. "When I was in Europe, I realized something important. True freedom is not just the absence of chains. It is the ability to make authentic choices, based on who we truly are and what we desire." He watched her intently, without interrupting. "For a long time, my life was defined by circumstances beyond my control, by necessity, by fear, by survival." Louisa approached him, keeping her gaze fixed on his. "Now for the first time I can choose based only on what I feel, on what I want." "And what do you want, Louisa?" Raphael asked, his voice slightly hoarse with contained emotion. In response, she simply extended her hand, lightly touching his face. The gesture, so simple and yet so laden with meaning, said everything words could not adequately express. When their lips finally met, there was no urgency, no desperation, just the quiet certainty of two people who had traveled a long road to finally meet as equals. The setting sun cast golden rays through the large windows, illuminating the space that represented not only a new beginning, but the promise of something built on genuine foundations, respect, understanding, and that feeling they had both held back for so long, allowing it to mature naturally. "I think I'll love creating in this atelier," Louisa murmured, when they finally separated. "But not today." Raphael raised an eyebrow, questioning. "Today," she continued, a smile lighting up her face, "I just want to celebrate the freedom to choose, to be able to say yes when I truly want to say yes." Night fell over New York City as they left the art center, walking hand in hand through the garden. Above them, the first stars appeared in the sky, no longer an inverted sky, as Raphael had once described the illuminated city, but the true firmament, vast and full of possibilities, exactly like the future that opened before them.